Hello again. I know that I've mentioned this book before, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, but I really feel it deserves a little more in-depth study. Before going any further, I must mention something about the style of the thing. The author is not really concerned so much with an objective study on the subject about which she writes. She is more concerned with propaganda. That is to say, making a point regardless of falsehood or truth, as long as she persuades readers to agree with her point of view. Some of what she says may be attributed to ignorance or indeed sloppy, possibly non-existent research. For instance, although she tries to trick out the book as an academic work, giving references for her statements, a quick glance at her sources soon gives the game away. Writing about Indian troops fighting for Britain during the First World War, for example, she says the following. Where are we now? Okay, she's talking about, she says here, over 1 million Indian soldiers, or sepoys, Indian soldiers serving for Britain, fought for Britain during the First World War. And she gives a reference here. Britain had promised these soldiers that their countries would be free from colonial rule if they did so. Sepoys travelled to Britain in the belief that they would not only be fighting for Britain, by doing so they would be contributing to their country's eventual freedom. Okay. A few lines later she says, even during the war, sepoys didn't receive the treatment they were expecting. The highest ranking sepoy was still lower in the army hierarchy than the lowest ranking white British soldier. If injured, a sepoy would be treated in the Brighton Pavilion and Dome Hospital. The hospital was surrounded with barbed wire to discourage wounded sepoys from mixing with the locals. Right. There's a false statement here, and also this allows her to line up a spurious accusation of racism a few lines later. But first, let's see what her source is for saying all this. It is Why the Indian Soldiers of World War I Were Forgotten, and this is an article by somebody called Shashi Tharoor for the BBC News magazine, and it's on the internet from July 2015. She's pulled it off the internet. Yes, that's right. She's been writing here about Indian soldiers during the First World War, and the only research she's done is just to Google the subject and write down verbatim what was found there. Yeah, she does the same for all her statements about the First World War and its aftermath. No looking at contemporary newspaper accounts, court transcripts and military records, stuff like that. Almost all her sources are just stuff published on the internet in the last 5 or 6 years. I give a link to the source she quotes in the description to this video so we can all see it. In it, we read correctly that 700,000 Indian sepoys, in brackets, infantry privates, fought in Mesopotamia against the Ottoman Empire. From this, we can be perfectly sure that Eddo-Lodge knows that sepoys are not Indian soldiers in general, but rather the name of a specific rank. So when she later on says the highest ranking sepoy was still lower in the army hierarchy than the lowest ranking white British soldier, we know that she is deliberately misleading readers and hinting at racism which was not there. Of course no sepoy could be higher than the lowest rank in the British Army. The lowest rank in the British Army is private, which is the equivalent to sepoy. So by pretending that sepoys are just is a general expression for all Indian soldiers, she is managing to deceive readers. Sepoy is simply the equivalent rank to private in the British Army. There were higher ranks in the Indian Army, of course, for example, Havildar, which was equivalent to sergeant, and men holding this rank were superior to privates in the British Army. She continues to talk about sepoys throughout as being a general term for all Indian soldiers, when she really does know better after reading the source, which she quotes. When she says of these Indian troops that were in hospital in Brighton, the hospital was surrounded by barbed wire to discourage wounded sepoys from mixing with the locals, we know that there's a deliberate lie there. All military establishments had barbed wire around them. There was a war on. Whether they were British army camps, British military hospitals, Indian hospitals or anything else, the army used to surround them with barbed wire. It was during a world war. That's what the army did. So that's one misleading thing that she mentions. The other is that men were not forbidden from mixing with the locals at all. The thumbnail to this video shows Sikhs about to go for a walk on the Downs at that time, leaving the hospital freely. There are many images of Indian soldiers mixing with local people in Brighton. I think Eddo-Lodge knows this, but wishes to make readers think that some kind of apartheid was being practised. This is very interesting. When you check that source that she was using, and viewers that read that will see at once that there's no excuse for this sort of ignorance. She knows about it. If she's read that source, she knows what sepoys were. She is deliberately making propaganda and trying to pretend that there was racism where none existed. As a matter of fact, this really is a disgusting attempt to accuse the British of racism. The hospital which occupied the Brighton Pavilion was adapted by the army with scrupulous cultural sensitivity. A marquee was erected in the grounds to act as a gurdwara or a temple for Sikhs, and an area of lawn which faced east was set aside for Muslim prayers. 9 different kitchens ensured that halal food was available and food suitable for all the other ethnic minorities, for the Hindus and the Sikhs. A section of a graveyard was set aside for Muslim burials. Rather than being practically a prison, the hospital was a model of sensitivity towards the needs of other religions and ethnicities. Because we can consult the source which Reni Eddo-Lodge uses, we know for certain that she was aware of all this when writing, and that her efforts to portray the British Army as racist is a calculated and quite deliberate lie. The only mixing with civilians about which the army was concerned, by the way, had nothing to do with ethnicity or race. In fact, they were more worried about what was known as khaki fever among the local girls. The war had caused many young women to regard soldiers the way that these days pop singers or footballers are seen, and the army didn't want loads of girls turning up at the hospital and trying to strike up friendships with the men there. This had nothing to do with race. The same precautions were taken at all army bases. It was not felt conducive to good order to have women hanging around the place. Reni Eddo-Lodge is either appallingly ignorant about the First World War and the Indian Army, or she is deliberately advancing a false perspective for reasons of her own. Since we know that the source she cites explains the meaning of the word sepoy, we can be pretty sure that she is aware that it was the equivalent rank to private. I think that she tries to confuse people by using the word as a generic term for Indian soldiers, so that she can pretend that racism was at work. I shall be looking at a bit more from this book in the next few days.